Hey guys, today we're going to be focusing on how to find our slope and our y-intercept from tables. So remember, our slope, we use the letter m, and we find it by our change in y over our change in x. And our b is our y-intercept. And we get that when x is equal to 0. So I'm looking at my table and I see my y-intercept is not in the table, because in my column of x, I do not see a value for 0. But I can find my slope. So I see from 22 to 31, my change in y was an increase of 9. So I can put that in the numerator of my slope ratio. So as my y increased by 9, my x's over here increased by 3. So every time y increased by 9, x increased by 3. So that tells me that every time y increased by 3, x increased by 1, because those are equivalent ratios. So my slope is just a 3. And that's the first part. The second part now is going to be looking at it and working backwards to find my y-intercept. So I see that I have when x is 6, x is 9, 15, negative 6, negative 9, and negative 12. But I need to know when x is equal to 0. Because if I can find what y is when x is equal to 0, then that gives me my y-intercept, or my b. So what we can do is work backwards. So if moving down, they were adding 3 to x, and then they had to add 9 to y, I can work backwards. And if I take 3 away, now x is 3, which means on my y side, I would need to take 9 away. And so 22 take away 9 is 13. And I'm not quite there again, so I would take away 3 more, which gets me to x equals 0. And I would take away 9 more from 13 to get a y-intercept of 4. So remember, when my x is equal to 0, the y value is my y-intercept. So my slope of this table was 3, and my y-intercept was a positive 4. So we can explore that with another table. So now we're looking at card 2. And again, I want to find my slope. And I want to find my y-intercept. Now, slope I know I can find by the change in y over the change in x. So how does y change as x changes? And if I look at my first 2 points right here, I see that I'm going from negative 13.5 to negative 12. So I see I added 1 and 5/10, or 1.5. And to x, as y increased by 1.5, x added by 1. So my change in y was a positive 1.5, as my change in x was a positive 1. So as y goes up by 1.5, x goes up by 1.5. Now my next job is to find my y-intercept, which means I need to find a value for y when x is equal to 0. I see a 0 on the y side, but that does not help me. I need to know what y is when x is equal to 0. But I have some helpful information because I know how my table is changing. And I know that as y goes up by 1.5, x goes up by 1. So I see in my table that I have a negative 1 and negative 7.5. So I'm going to make a table right here where I can add a little bit to it. So if x is negative 1, y would be negative 7.5. If I have the same exact slope, then that means that y is going to increase by 1.5 as x increases by 1. And negative 1 increased by 1 is 0. And negative 7.5 increased by 1.5 becomes a negative 5. So working backwards, very similar to the problem that we just did, the table we just looked at, we had to kind of work backwards to find the value of y when x was equal to 0. So if y is negative 5 when x is equal to 0, that means that it is our y-intercept. And that's all we're doing for today. Thank you.